All right, well, let's start it off. I mean, we pretty much, not a lot of suspense going into tonight's expansion draft show. Shout out to Frank for dropping bomb after bomb all morning. I mean, what an incredible performance. As far as insider performances go, this is about the closest thing we've seen to Adrian Wojnarowski and the way he runs things in the NBA. But of course, the news looks like Mason Appleton is going to be the guy that is a member of the Kraken, which means the Jets, in some ways, I think, to many, dodge a bullet and don't lose Dylan DeMello. They already had work to do on the blue line, and a loss of Dylan DeMello would have, really increased what Kevin Cheveldayoff needs to do. Is this sort of best case scenario for the Winnipeg Jets, as great of a player as Appleton was for Winnipeg?
Yeah, I 100%. I think so. And it's bad to say that but you knew, like, you always knew you were going to lose somebody, right?
Yeah.
Unless you do some sort of side deal. But everything we heard leading into the side deals were all these were, it was quite expensive, right? We're going to find out a bunch of them, I think, though, because if you look at some of the players that were taken this morning, you would suspect there's some side deals in there, given some of the names that a lot of people probably haven't even heard of, including myself on a couple of guys. So, you lose Appleton, but that's kind of where you have more of a, I don't want to say a glut, because the prospect pool in Winnipeg has depleted quite a bit, especially up front. But you still have Jansen Harkins, Christian Vesalainen, guys like that who can still step up in the organization. Appleton, obviously great, a good player, but this is the big problem was, you already had an issue on the blue line heading into the offseason, and you've had it for a couple of years now. Dylan DeMello has been that guy who has been able to kind of solidify a little bit, at least. Part of that, possibly Josh Morrissey's defensive partner going forward. Don't know yet, depending what Kevin Cheveldayoff can do over the offseason. But you didn't want to make the problem worse. And that was the risk that the Jets took. I mean, there was the risk that they would take Dylan DeMello, but although in the days leading up, what I had heard was, Mason Appleton was the guy. And I think it's because of just the way that Seattle went. They valued very much cap space. They have a lot of it. And they'll be able to take a lot of snipes in free agency and whatever else they decide to do with whatever they have amassed here in when it comes to these side deals and that sort of thing. I also think the one thing that that was good for the Jets is Mikhail Burton's still in the organization. I thought there would be some look at him as well. An up and coming kind of prospect goaltender who could be quite good. But you see with the way that Seattle went with goalies, they went with some young prospects as well. Anyways, so as difficult as it would be for fans to look at that and see, Mason Appleton's gone. I think a large chunk of fans are happy that, the defense didn't get worse than it is right now currently. And they can now focus quite heavily, the Jets can, on upgrading their defense, which is, priority number one times like 1,000 right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as I said, if Dylan DeMello is all of a sudden not in the mix, it exponentially makes it, just more. I mean, it's sort of like what's happened in Edmonton. I mean, in Edmonton, I did the lock shop with Dusty earlier today, and, he's doing his show in the morning, and they're all talking about the expansion draft, and get the bomb dropped that Adam Larsson's just signed with the Kraken, and he's gone. And I mean, he's a guy, it was funny. The two guys we heard this morning that had signed that were free agents, Adam Larsson and Jamie Alexiak, were players I'm sure would have been getting a call from the Winnipeg Jets to play on that. Certainly Larson on the right side. I mean, how good would he have looked in the top four with Winnipeg? But the fact of the matter was, when those guys got signed, I think from a Jets perspective, you probably felt a little bit better about maybe dodging that bullet with DeMello. We may as well touch on this because you brought him up. By the way, congratulations to Cole, who was named to the training camp for, obviously for the World Juniors. But a couple of Carson Lambos, who was on the show yesterday and is expected to go in the first round of the weekend, and Connor McClellan of the Winnipeg Ice as well. So shout out to all those guys. But for Perfetti for a minute, while you bring it up, that is such a fascinating scenario, especially with losing Mason Appleton as a top 9 player.
Yeah.
Normally in normal times, I don't think Cole Perfetti is in the mix for this year. But when you look at the season he had last year, playing the way he did, growing the way he did in the American Hockey League, putting up the numbers and showing the growth that he did, World Juniors, and then going to the World Championships, like, I'll say this. I don't think there's anything to be gained by Cole Perfetti playing in the Ontario Hockey League next year. And unfortunately for Cole and for the Jets, that's the option.
That's the option.
So, I mean, I kind of look at this almost more like Nikolai Ehlers. I mean, Ehlers played the year junior and then came in at 19 and he scored 15 goals and sort of, got his feet wet. And, he's developed into an incredible player. If I had to bet right now, Scott, I think we at least start the season with Cole Perfetti on the Winnipeg Jets roster. And, he's given the opportunity to kind of show that he's ready, because I don't think it's ideal for the Winnipeg Jets to send him back to junior. And unfortunately, until anything changes, as a 19-year-old coming out of the Canadian Hockey League, the AHL is not an option, despite the fact of what he showed last year in that league due to the pandemic.
Yeah, it's almost like last year was a double-edged sword, right? It's nice to see that Cole Perfetti could play the pro game and do it well. At the same time, it's also kind of giving you this kind of good sort of headache. It's like, do you... Well, I think you do what you did with Scheifele and guys like that, right? Where you do give him the game, see where he can. I just don't know where he necessarily fits in that top 9. Like you don't.
He's not a fourth liner,
right? Exactly, and that's not where he's projected to go. You were thinking either first or second line center in the future, eventually. But the problem is you have that kind of sewn up right now. Not the problem. It's not. It's not a bad problem, but you have Scheifele, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Adam Lowry. I mean, those are your 3 centers in that top 9. So are you going to play Cole Perfetti on the wing and see that? Or do you just let, he's going to play in the World Juniors very likely this year. So he's not, there's obviously that tournament that he plays. It's tough. Yeah, you don't want, he's going to be way too good for the OHL and probably thinking like, what does that do to his development? I don't know if it does anything poor to it. It's almost kind of a stagnant year when he's just going to be dominating guys in the O. And, it's not ideal, but last year wasn't ideal anyways. We never would have seen this Cole Perfetti if not for COVID and not for what happened and not for the OHL, not even playing 1 game last year. So, it'll be interesting. I do agree that he'll get some games. I think early in the season, that sort of thing, he'll be on the roster. He will go back. We all know that, unless some Mark Scheifele blows his ACL or something like that, then you start looking. It's a lot different at that point. But barring some freak kind of injury like that, or something like that, Cole Perfetti's going to have to go back in the OHL, play in the World Juniors, and then probably be over marinated enough to come in the following year, or at least play in the AHL. And get another year of pro hockey under his belt.
Yeah, as I said, I wouldn't at all be surprised if he's not even playing for Canada at the World Juniors. I guess the premise is that he'll have an opportunity, man. Without the other options, I think they'd, if he shows that he's sort of ready, even for a sheltered role, much like we saw them kind of ease Stanley, and I know it's different from forward to the blue line,
right?
Depending on where he is. Like you said, sometimes you play these guys and you realize that, well, maybe they are ready. And he's passed every test so far. So, anyways, that'll be interesting. And he'll be a guy that we talk a lot about, depending on who else comes into the mix in this Winnipeg Jets group going forward. Listen, beyond this weekend, going into free agency, I sort of mentioned 2 guys that I know we've talked about, and Jamie Alexiak for sure. And if Adam Larsson made it to market, he would be a natural guy to try to add. He's exactly that sort of piece, especially with the threat of losing DeMello. DeMello's still in the mix. Do you have any guys that you expect the Jets to target, or putting your GM hat on, that you'd be making a call to their agent at 12:01 or whenever they're able to?
For me, it's Brandon Montour. And here's the reason. I was decently high on Brandon Montour back at last 2 trade deadlines. And I think the reason is he was in Buffalo, and Buffalo was so bad that they made every player look bad, right? Like, it was just a bad team that everybody. Brandon Montour went to Florida to play at the trade deadline and played well. Again, this guy turned all of his analytics much better. Everything was better when Brandon Montour went to Florida. I like the idea of Brandon Montour. He's 27, so right-handed defenseman. If you're not going to land Dougie Hamilton, which I don't think you're going to land, I like Brandon Montour. There's been a lot of talk about Rasmus Ristolainen. I don't know what the price is on Ristolainen at this point. It's got to be only a pick. What are you giving for a guy who's only got 1 year left on his contract and is a UFA right after that? There's no this isn't the case where it's Laine and Ehlers for Ristolainen anymore. It's what is the right pick if you're going after a guy like that. I know a lot of fans don't like the idea of Ristolainen because of his analytics. I also think the problem with that too is, and the same reason why talking about Brandon Montour, he's playing for such a garbage team in terms of, how poorly they were on the ice. I'm not entirely sure how you kind of evaluate a guy like that. That's an interesting one. And then there's just kind of like, I don't know, do you look at a Ryan Suter for a year and see if he can play at all? I mean, it's going to be cheap. What about a Keith Yandel? I don't know, but you got to do something. I think it's got to be a bigger name than those two. I mean, even Brandon Montour might not be the guy. So maybe you have to start looking in the trade market and like, what can you get? I mean, what can you get from another team that's in the cap crunch? I mean, yeah, Larson's gone. It looks like Alexiuk is also signing in Seattle. So, those guys are gone. The Jets made a hard push for Jamie Alexiuk at the trade deadline, and it fell through, and it didn't work for them. And now doesn't look like they're going to have a chance from there either. So maybe David Savard. We talked a ton about David Savard going into the trade deadline. Now he's won a Stanley Cup, and he went to a team, played a big role. I mean, I liked how David Savard played in the playoffs. He's kind of that defensive-minded guy that the Jets desperately need. You go after David Savard. What is he going to cost? But aside from you going out and giving Dougie Hamilton $9 million and him accepting it coming here to come to Winnipeg, I think you start having to look at that either trades or trying to get guys that fit what you want to do on defense. And I think that's taking a lot of the pressure off the forwards from having to do that, to let them do what they do best, which is score. I mean, let's not forget, like, this team is a high scoring offensive team that can do it. But when you're stuck playing defense the whole time, trying to play this 5-man unit, and don't get me wrong, you still have to play defense, but the Jets were good before in 2017-18 and even first half of 2018-19 because they had good defensemen that they could rely on. It wasn't such a porous defensive game like they have now. So you need to take a big swing here. I don't think it's Dougie Hamilton just because of the cap and not being able to really afford that, especially when you got to give, when you got to give Andrew Copp money and that sort of thing. And if I assume, again, kind of on a tangent here, with Copp, they must feel enough that they can get a deal done with him, or at least that the prospect there is, better than 50%. That they didn't, I think, Andrew Copp either would have been traded or whatever would have happened before that. So they could have just, kept either Appleton or DeMello or on the protected list if Copp. So I think there's
the only thing I'll say about the Copp situation.
Sign,
listen, the one thing, because I'm sort of with you, and I mean, I really did think, and we talked on this show leading into the weekend, that to me, sort of the first domino for the Winnipeg Jets, was Andrew Copp before we got to protecting everyone. But then I thought about it, and listen, if you're going to trade Andrew Copp, I mean, you're not trading him for picks. You're not trading him for prospects. I mean, I think that if you're trading Andrew Copp, you're, making a deal to bring in another defenseman, someone that would presumably be on that list. So, I think that the jury is still out on that. I'm fascinated as to how negotiations are going. I mean, of course, he's represented by Kurt Overhart. I mean, I still will never forget his interview with us back on the old station after that arbitration. And the thing I love about Copp is he's such a straight shooter. And I mean, he said basically it sucked and he was pissed off about it. And I mean, that's not a great way maybe to go into the next chapter. Now, listen, money solves a lot of things. And if the money's there for him, he's just had a career year. I do think that if I'm Andrew Copp, I mean, I guess there's an element to betting on yourself going for one more year, but considering the flat cap, considering his importance to the Jets, I think how much they want to keep him, I do think a deal is there to be made. But I'll ask you, if Larry Simmons and Kevin Cheveldayoff are, smashing their head against a wall and getting nowhere with Kurt Overhart, how might that change what they do? Like, if that's the case and they sort of know where they're at, does that change anything about what they're thinking of doing come the weekend? Because, of course, there will be a lot of deals. I think we'll see as much player movement in the league over the next few days as we may at any point over the course of this offseason.
Yeah, I think you have to consider it, right? I think, a couple of the contracts that were signed this summer already, like the Nugent-Hopkins deal, kind of helped the Jets a little bit, right? I mean, 5.1 for, I think it's 5.1 AAV for Nugent-Hopkins. Well, Copp's not a Nugent-Hopkins. Whether or not Copp is, a better playoff player, whatever, the Nugent Hopkins, fine. But when it comes to the contracts, I don't think Andrew Copp's getting $5 million anymore. Now you're starting to look, is it between that $4 and $4.5 million number? Did Adam Lowry kind of not really help his buddy out there, and Andrew Copp in signing the deal that he signed? So that's the interesting thing. I don't know what the valuation of Andrew Copp is, and I don't think a lot of people really know what it is. Obviously, the agent's gonna put it very high, and the Jets are gonna have their idea. And I don't think this is the Overhart Trubis situation. I think Andrew Copp has proven that he does deserve a pay raise. I think he is your kind of Swiss Army knife, because you can put him anywhere in the lineup, absolutely anywhere in the lineup. And he's shown that he can, you can play competently at those spots. But yeah, it does matter. Like you said, if the Jets don't think that they can actually, if they can't get to where they want to be with him, maybe he is a trade chip, right? We have to remember the Jets, who love the draft, only have 4 draft picks this year. I don't think it's necessarily a horrible thing this year, just given the volatility of what you're doing at this point. But there are still some guys out there. I mean, I think the Jets are going to look at a Carson Ceulemans or Corson Ceulemans, or maybe even a Carson Lambos. I mean, I don't know. Do you take the Winnipeg guy and go from there? I like the Carson Ceuleman or Corson. So I'm going to always get that wrong. The Corson Ceuleman, he's a 6'2" defenseman playing in the AJHL. We'll see how that translates to the college game eventually. There's the Fabian Lissel. People think he's going to drop and fall. I mean, you take a stab at a guy like that. If he is going to do that, take him where you are at 17 there and go from there. So I guess it's 18th overall. Are they still calling it 18th overall, even though Arizona doesn't have the pick? Yeah. Anyways, whatever.
Oh, good point. Good point. Yeah. I forgot about this. Yeah. The old forfeited pick. Thank you, John Chaika.
I don't know how they actually, whatever the I don't know what they actually call it, but either way, I mean, the Jets are going to have, I think there's going to be some options there for them at the draft. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, what does Copp get you at the draft, if that's the case, and what hole do you now have to fill?
Well, that's the huge Andrew question. Copp, right? I mean, you're already losing Mason Appleton. I mean, to be honest, I think this transgression, like with Appleton being selected over DeMello,
right?
Kurt Overhart is pumped right now because.
Leverage.
First of all, there's less of a need on the blue line with DeMello staying in-house with some contract term left at $3 million a year. But the other side of it is that the fact that Appleton is now gone, you're already missing a key spot of a very effective third line. Everything looks different if Copp isn't around. I mean, you're essentially starting from scratch with Adam Lowry back in with 2 new wingers on a line that Paul Maurice has leaned on extensively ever since they were put together.
Yep, exactly. But you also can't overpay. As Kenny Weeb likes to always tell me, you can't give every guy $5 million. It just doesn't work. And, he's talked me off the ledge on that type of thing too, because it's, it is, you want an Andrew Copp. I mean, he helps solidify a very, very good third line. And then when an injury happens, he moves up to the second or even the first line, whatever it is. I mean, there's a lot of value in a guy who also is, very good analytically, coming off a career year where he showed that he can score. I don't think, that was by accident. Andrew Copp has almost every year, I think, improved his game. This is a guy that keeps getting better. I don't know where the ceiling is. I don't think he's too far off from it. But he's a guy that makes your team better. And to lose, like you said, if you lose 2/3 of your third line, what are you left with? Sure, you can, you have Christian Vesalainen and Jansen Howardkins, but if those guys don't work out, then what? I mean, it gets thin when you go down to the minors there and look in the prospect pool and that sort of thing. So I like the idea. I like the chance of the Jets re-signing Copp. I don't think they're going to have to overpay him too much because, I mean, there is contracts out there that are fairly similar. I don't, is it going to be the Kurt overpay, kind of deal? I don't know. You kind of lean towards that, but I think Kurt Overhart gets a bad rep here because he was the agent of Jacob Trouba and how that whole thing went down.
You don't say.
I don't think it's always like that. it's just, I mean, when a player wants out of a player, out of a city, like Trouba did, your agent, that's his job. And Kurt Overgaard does his job very, very well. And I know as much as fans may not like him, he's a good agent. I mean, just look at a guy like Alan Washer. We were not getting the sword in the back of Andrew Copp photos from. So it could be worse in my opinion.
No, well, we didn't get any ridiculous press release from the Overhart agency about playing on the right side or anything like that. Absolutely. So at least things are good. Anyways, that'll be a big fascinating going forward. Let's assume Copp stays. Let's just, for sake of argument, Copp gets a deal done, whatever it is, he's back in the mix. Let's take Cole Perfetti out because we've already talked about him and he is sort of a unique situation. In a house right now, Appleton leaving, who's the next in line, if you will? Who gets the biggest bump up opportunity-wise because of Appleton moving to the West Coast?
Yeah, to me, it's Christian Vesalainen. And I liked how Christian Vesalainen took on that role in the playoffs when he played. I liked how he's come a long way. If you would have asked me this a year ago, I would have been like, oh man, like, I don't think he's ever going to play in the NHL. But I mean, I'm talking to some people, getting to watch him a little bit more in the AHL, and then seeing how he kind of translated that game into an NHL role where he was everywhere. I mean, this guy was good. And then if he got the shot off, and I think that's going to be the thing, like, we have to forget, I mean, Patrick Laine used to say Christian Vesalainen had just as good of a shot as he did, or at least a release. And there was always that kind of, it was interesting because they're both Finns and that sort of thing. But I like Christian Vesalainen's game a lot more than I did a couple of years ago, and seeing it in action in the playoffs where he was, obviously in a shelter role and all that sort of thing. But I think he played well. I think he showed well. He was physical. He was getting into the battles. He was winning them. He got a couple shots off in those games. I think with an actual, training camp where he knows he's going to be a part of the team, or at least, knows that there's way more of a chance of him breaking into the lineup next year. I think that helps. But yeah, I like Christian Vesalainen. I know there's Jansen Harkins there. I just think it's Christian Vesalainen's job. I think it's about time that he starts making his push into the NHL. And it seems, based on what I've seen from him, that he is ready now for that. He's adapted his game. I know that was always the thing with him. It was difficult for the transition from the European kind of game on the bigger ice and down to the more compact NHL game on North American ice. It took some time for him, but now it seems like he's gotten there. He knows how to move, where to go, that sort of thing. I think it's Christian Vesalainen who stands to benefit the most, and where the Jets could, I think they benefit a lot from him kind of giving him that push and getting him into the lineup.
I'm with you on that. I mean, I think that Harkins, I think we can take something from the season that he had last year. I mean, the fact that, going into the playoffs, I mean, who's the guy that came into the lineup? Well, it was Dominic Toninato. Yeah. And certainly, I mean, your point about Vesalainen, I know we talked about some young players being ready, so more than others. I mean, Vesalainen was a guy that has really benefited from, earning his way up. And I think he has sort of earned that spot to be part of this club next. And I'm with you on that.